Throughout the movie, there are these foreign words that appear on the walls that are never really explained. So if you want to hear all about the meanings of the symbology and phrases hidden around the film, stick around to the end of this video. As with all things you missed episodes, there will be spoilers. I just wanted to emphasize this time because this film really goes into some unexpected places, so do yourself the favor of watching the movie before you watch this video. So with that being said, wow, this was a crazy movie. I did not expect this to become a possession film, but looking back on it, the signs are all there. I even noticed a lot of the signs like the necklace and the decapitated figures when I did the things you missed on the trailer way back in January. But they withheld enough information to keep us in the dark during the movie. So let's start at the beginning. The first thing we see is a title card letting us know about the passing of the grandmother, Ellen. And it also introduces us to her daughter, Annie, and her granddaughter, Charlie. The 3 generations of women are the basis for the movie's title, Hereditary, or something determined by genetic factors and therefore able to be passed down from parents to their offspring or descendants. What is this trait being passed down? We don't find that out until later. The first shot we see is the treehouse. Little do we know, it's actually a chapel of demonic worship. Hear that? That's the sound of the exploding heads of everyone who didn't take my advice to just see the movie first. This treehouse is significant because at the beginning of the film, the family is getting ready to head to their grandmother's funeral service, and they can't find Charlie because she actually sleeps out in the treehouse. When the mom finds her there, she's upset because apparently it's really cold, and she's worried that Charlie might catch pneumonia, to which Charlie says, "I don't care." Getting pneumonia is pretty serious, unless you're planning on ditching your current vessel for a new body sometime soon. Based off of that, the demon, King Paimon, is already in possession of Charlie's body at the start of the movie, possibly before she's even born. Her mother tells her that she never once cried as a baby, and that the grandmother really wanted her to be a boy, suggesting that she had been planning to make the child into a male vessel, befitting the demon from before Charlie's birth. The doormat embroidered by the grandma even says Charles instead of Charlie. At the funeral, Annie gives quite a strange eulogy for her mother. Let's roll it. It's heartening to see so many strange new faces here today. I know my mom would be very touched and probably a little suspicious. I think it's pretty clear what those private rituals are now, knowing that she was the leader, or as they call it in this movie, the queen, of a demonic cult. As for the private friends she mentioned, they are her followers. She notes that the faces who show up to the funeral are not familiar, and that is probably why. In fact, I think the naked people who appear in the house towards the end of the movie. A24 loves their creepy naked old people, don't they? See Charlie eating a chocolate bar? And chocolate can be associated with the devil. It's the devil's temptation. That's why you have devil's food cake, which is the chocolate one, and angel's food cake, which is not the chocolate one. I'm pretty sure chocolate is the only thing we see her eat. First this chocolate bar, and second the chocolate cake at the party. Side note, I absolutely love how she eats the chocolate like Mello from Death Note. I was smiling to myself in the theater when I saw that. I also dug the red doorknob. I think it was on Peter's room, or possibly Charlie's, and that's a reference to the Sixth Sense. It could be that the red doorknob was used in a similar way to indicate the presence of spirits, so I found that to be an interesting parallel, because the two films do share a lot of similarities. So the family gets home from the funeral, and they're all dealing with grief in their own ways. Annie recreates moments from her mother's life using her miniatures. So what's the meaning behind the miniatures? Here's my interpretation. It has to do with one of the traits that's passed down in the family, manipulation. Starting at the top, King Paimon manipulates Ellen into leading the cult that worships him by offering to make her his queen. In turn, Ellen manipulates the entire family. Annie, Steve, Charlie and Peter are all her pawns in her plot to resurrect King Paimon. She's orchestrating all of the pieces that lead to King Paimon getting into his intended body, Peter's body. Annie is subconsciously at King Paimon's will as well, but her mind is strong enough to resist him, at least for the time being. That's why he's only able to control her subconscious, the reason she finds herself on the verge of burning up her son while sleepwalking, and the reason she finds herself creating miniature versions of the tragic events that lead up to the body transfer. Her manipulation of the miniature figures represents her mother's manipulation of the actual household. But it doesn't stop there, because Charlie is also into arts and crafts, making her own miniature figures and idols, and eventually making the life-size King Paimon idol that we see at the end of the movie. She doesn't seem to have any other interests outside of creating these demented figures. She's doing sketches at the funeral, modifying some toy during class, and cutting up a dead bird at recess. So this manipulation is a trait that runs all the way down the family line, and it seems to be passed to all of the females. I also did a little reading on King Paimon, and apparently he has a flair for the arts, and people like to call on him to assist with their creative projects, which is why Annie and Charlie display their traits through their craft. As we get later into the movie, Annie's mind gets weaker and weaker. Annie works less on the model for her work and more on personal pieces representing the family, because she'll soon be a pawn of King Paimon, like her mother before her. As Peter's classmate put it in a discussion about the flaws of Greek mythological figure Heracles, the characters are all just pawns in this horrible hopelessness. I think that stands for the movie, Hereditary, as well. Ellen obviously doesn't see it that way because she leaves a note for Annie, essentially apologizing for what's happened so far and what's about to happen, but saying that these sacrifices must be made and everything will be good in the end. I'm paraphrasing here, but she's basically outlining her plan to tear apart the family with tragedy so that she can become the queen and they can join the cult of Paimon. This begins before her death. At the first group meeting that Annie goes to try to ease her grief, she talks a little bit about her family history and mentions that her mom has DID and dementia. DID, if you don't know, is short for dissociative identity disorder, commonly referred to as multiple personality disorder. I don't think she really has this disorder though. It would make a lot of sense if she was starting to lose control to King Paimon, making it appear that she was switching personalities. If that's the case, it could also help explain her dementia. Not much background is given on the rest of the family, but we know that Annie's father starved himself and her brother committed suicide. Which brings me to the second trait that is passed down in Hereditary, though it's not so much of a trait as it is a commonality, that they all suffer tragic deaths. You have to believe that King Paimon is somehow involved in carrying that out. This all comes to a head with Charlie. At 13, she should be old enough to check anything she eats in regards to her food allergy, but something causes her to eat that cake anyways, and just when it looks like Peter might be able to rush her to the hospital in time, she sticks her head out the window and gets decapitated by the pole on the side of the road. But this is no accident. It's all part of Ellen and King Paimon's plan. Decapitation seems to somehow be a requirement for the cult, because we see the same thing happen to the bodies of Ellen and Annie. If you need any further proof, the symbol of King Paimon can be seen on that same pole as Peter and Charlie head to the party. Nearly everything that the demon has manipulated has this symbol. It's on Annie and Ellen's necklaces, in Joan's house after she's placed the curse on Annie, and written in blood on the roof of the attic where Ellen's body is stored. When we see the king at the end, the idol also wears that symbol. I already mentioned how one of Peter's classmates has the on-point Heracles analysis. Well, in another class he's learning about the Great Depression. You can see it written on the chalkboard, and how it was started by the Great Crash, which was when the stock market crashed in 1929. You could say the same about the family in the movie though, that a Great Depression was cast over them after a great crash. After that depression sets in, the demon, with the help of Ellen's secret friend Joan, starts to take over the family in order to get to the body that he wants. Joan pretends to befriend Annie at the support group so that she can ease her into the idea of performing the ritual to summon King Paimon. She is almost given away by her doormat, which was made by Annie's mother, who embroidered the doormats for the grandkids. But Annie ends up brushing it off as just a similar style. Eventually Annie does find out that Joan and Ellen were in cahoots. All she had to do was look in her mother's left-behind photo album. But their relationship was so bad that Ellen didn't even have to worry about her daughter finding out. In fact, it's mentioned that they were practically estranged until the birth of Charlie, when Ellen suddenly started to take interest for obvious reasons. She had plans for Charlie. Suddenly, all the weird stuff from early on starts to make more sense. how Charlie was her grandmother's favorite child, how Annie kept Ellen away from Peter, but, quote, gave Charlie to her, how Annie wasn't even allowed to breastfeed her own daughter because she needed to feed you, and how Charlie wondered who would be taking care of her now that Ellen was gone. But as Annie starts to figure out what's going on, she begins to lose herself to the fate destined by her DNA. All of a sudden, she can only get sleep in the treehouse, which, as a reminder, is a freezing cold demon worship site. Fights break out at the dinner table. Annie accuses Peter of looking at her with that face on his face. All I do is worry, and all I get back is that face on your face. Possible reference to the fact that he is not destined to possess his own body. Also, after the death of Charlie, we start to see this light flare occasionally come up. I believe this strange light is the physical manifestation of King Paimon when he's not inside of the body. We see it stalk Peter in the hall at school, where he ends up temporarily losing himself to King Paimon, smashing his face against the desk. Then it comes up after the father, Steve, bursts into flames, suggesting that it's traveling from one body to another. Then near the end, when Peter commits suicide by jumping out the window, the light travels, lands on him, then disappears. When Peter's body reawakes, he's taken over by King Paimon. He goes to his new place of worship, the treehouse, where the movie ends with many voices chanting the name of the King of Hell. There are only like 6 people in the treehouse, and half of them are beheaded, but it sounds like 20 or more voices chanting, which created a creepy effect that actually sounded like the audience members in front of me were chanting too. So that covers everything that I noticed in the movie, except for the strange words written on the wall throughout the movie. We know that they're not English, and they're likely the same language that Joan made Annie recite the ritual spell in. Here are 4 words that I noticed. I couldn't find much info on Satany, other than the fact that it's used as a word to summon a demon, and it sounds kind of similar to Satan. Zazas is similar to Zaza or Zozo, which is part of a supposed phenomenon among Ouija board users, where upon asking who they were speaking to, the board would spell out Z-A-Z-A or Z-O-Z-O. I was only able to find a couple sources online talking about liftoch, but I guess it's a rough English spelling of the Hebrew word lifto, which means open, and it was used in this one black metal song called Dissection by Rain Chaos, where the full line translated to "Blind dragon open your eyes" could have something to do with those pictures of Peter with his eyes crossed out. And then the last one is pandemonium, an English word meaning wild and noisy disorder, and it also contains the word demon inside of it. Alright, there was a lot to take in with this movie, so drop me a comment and let me know what you noticed, and if you enjoyed this movie, let me know by giving this video a like. This has been a crazy week. If you're a horror fan, new movies, new trailers, I'm going to be keeping you up to date on all the new things you missed. Remember to subscribe to Studiovity for new horrors, ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.